The Marina Del Rey boatyard reeked of diesel and decay as Marcus Chen stared at the rust-covered hull of the Sea Whisper. 3 weeks behind on rent, living off ramen noodles, he'd inherited this floating junkyard from Uncle Jimmy, a man he'd met exactly twice. The lawyer said it was worthless. The eviction notice in Marcus's pocket suggested otherwise. What Marcus didn't know was that 25 years ago he'd been the best marine salvage diver on the West Coast before a diving accident stole his nerve and left him broken. The skills were still there, buried like everything else in his life. As he pried open a rusted panel in the yacht's belly, Marcus discovered a waterproof chamber containing paintings wrapped in oiled canvas. His hands trembled as he unwrapped them, originals worth millions, reported stolen from a Beverly Hills mansion decades ago. But the real shock came when he found the newspaper clipping tucked beneath, a photo of Uncle Jimmy shaking hands with notorious crime boss Vincent Torrino. Why had Jimmy hidden a fortune in stolen art, and who else knew about it? The yellowed newspaper dated back to 1997, its headlines screaming about the largest art heist in California history. Marcus counted 7 paintings total, each one carefully catalogued in his memory from the crime documentaries he'd binged during sleepless nights. A Monet water lily study, 2 Picasso sketches, a small but exquisite Van Gogh landscape. His factory worker's salary wouldn't earn this much in 3 lifetimes. His phone buzzed. A text from his landlord, final notice. Pay by midnight or we start proceedings. Marcus laughed bitterly. 12 hours ago he'd been planning which belongings to sell just to buy groceries. Now he sat surrounded by enough wealth to buy the entire apartment complex. If he could figure out how to claim it without ending up in prison, or worse. The yacht creaked ominously around him, its ancient hull settling deeper into the murky harbor water. Marcus had always wondered why Uncle Jimmy lived like a hermit despite owning this boat. Even rotting Sea Whisper represented serious money. A 60-foot Bertram from the golden age of yacht building, she would have cost a fortune new, but Jimmy had let her deteriorate, visiting only monthly to check on things. Now Marcus understood. Jimmy hadn't been checking the boat's condition, he'd been guarding a secret. Footsteps echoed across the dock outside. Marcus quickly rewrapped the paintings, his heart hammering. Through the small porthole, he glimpsed 2 figures in expensive suits walking purposefully between the moored vessels. They moved with predatory efficiency, scanning each boat systematically. One of them spoke into a phone. "Yeah, we're at the marina. Jimmy's nephew showed up this morning, just like Torrino predicted." Marcus's blood turned to ice. They were looking for him. He stuffed the newspaper clipping into his jacket and sealed the paintings back in their waterproof chamber. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory from his diving days taking over. Even after the accident that destroyed his career, a cable snap that left him trapped underwater for 8 terrifying minutes, his brain still catalogued escape routes and emergency procedures. The yacht had 2 exits, the main hatch where he'd entered, now blocked by the approaching men, and an emergency porthole in the engine compartment. Marcus had noticed it during his initial exploration, dismissing it as too small, but desperation had a way of making impossible things possible. He crawled toward the stern, staying low. The boat rocked gently, diesel fumes making his eyes water. Outside, the footsteps had stopped. Marcus heard muffled voices, then the distinctive sound of someone boarding the yacht. "Search everything," a gravelly voice commanded. "If Jimmy hid anything on this rust bucket, we find it tonight." Marcus reached the engine compartment as the first flashlight beam swept through the main cabin. The porthole was exactly as small as he remembered, maybe 18 inches in diameter. At 6 feet tall, he'd have to dislocate something to squeeze through. But the alternative was facing whatever Vincent Torrino's men had planned for him. He worked the corroded latches with practiced fingers, grateful for the manual dexterity that 20 years of factory work had maintained. The porthole gave way with a soft click that sounded thunderous in the confined space. The men were tearing apart the main cabin now, their search growing more violent. Marcus heard panels splintering, cushions being slashed open. They'd find the hidden chamber eventually. Jimmy's concealment was clever, but not perfect. Marcus forced his shoulders through the porthole, ignoring the metal edges scraping his ribs. Cold harbour water lapped 3 feet below. He'd swum in worse conditions, though not recently. Not since the accident made diving impossible. But this wasn't diving. This was survival. He squeezed through completely and dropped silently into the oily water just as shouts erupted from inside the yacht. They'd found the chamber. Now came the hard part, staying alive long enough to figure out what Uncle Jimmy had really gotten him into. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marina as Marcus made his way back to the Cassandra's dream, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a crowbar in the other. He'd barely slept, his mind churning over what else Uncle Ezra might have hidden aboard the deteriorating vessel. The discovery of the Monet had transformed what should have been a simple salvage operation into something far more complex and dangerous. The yacht looked even more pathetic in daylight, her once white hull now streaked with rust and bird droppings. Marcus climbed aboard, the deck creaking ominously under his weight. He'd already decided to conduct a thorough search before involving anyone else, including the authorities. The painting could be worth millions, but only if it was legitimate, and only if he could prove legal ownership. He started in the main cabin, methodically checking every panel, every joint where wood met wood. The crowbar proved useful for prying loose rotted sections, revealing the yacht's skeletal frame beneath layers of decay. Behind a false panel near the galley, his efforts were rewarded with another discovery, a waterproof document case. Inside, he found certificates of authenticity, insurance documents, and what appeared to be sales records dating back 15 years. The handwriting was Uncle Ezra's. Marcus recognized the distinctive scrawl from old birthday cards. But these weren't simple transaction records. They detailed a sophisticated network of acquisitions, many of them noted with cryptic references to private collections and estate liquidations. One document made his blood run cold. It was a newspaper clipping about a museum heist in Barcelona, dated 12 years ago. Someone, presumably Ezra, had circled an article about stolen paintings, including works by Monet, Degas, and Picasso. In the margin, Ezra had written coordinates and what looked like inventory numbers. Marcus sat heavily on a mildewed cushion, the implications washing over him. His uncle hadn't just stumbled upon valuable artwork. He'd been involved in art theft on an international scale. The yacht wasn't just a hiding place, it was a floating warehouse for stolen masterpieces. A sound from above deck made him freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and careful, moving across the bow. Marcus quickly stuffed the documents back into the case and grabbed the crowbar, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd been careful to arrive early, before the marina's usual morning bustle, but someone had found him anyway. "Mr. Chen?" A woman's voice, accented. European, possibly French. "I know you're aboard. We need to talk." Marcus remained silent, weighing his options. The main cabin had only one exit, and whoever was up there was blocking it. He could hear at least 2 sets of footsteps now, moving with practiced coordination. "Your uncle was a business partner of ours," the woman continued, her tone conversational, but with an underlying edge. "We're simply here to collect what belongs to us. No harm need come to you." Business partner. Marcus's grip tightened on the crowbar. These weren't law enforcement officers. They were likely criminals, probably the same people Ezra had worked with, which meant they knew exactly what was hidden on this boat. He crept toward the narrow companionway leading to the lower cabin, hoping to find another way out. The yacht's original blueprints, which he'd studied online, showed an emergency hatch near the stern. If he could reach it without being detected, he might escape through the water. The footsteps moved closer to the main hatch. Marcus could see shadows falling across the cabin entrance, and he pressed himself against the bulkhead, barely breathing. The document case felt impossibly heavy in his hands, evidence of crimes that could destroy his life, but also potentially the key to understanding what he'd inherited. "Patience is not infinite, Mr. Chen," the woman called out. "We know about the Monet, we know about the others. Your uncle's death was unfortunate, but it doesn't change our arrangement." Others. Marcus's stomach dropped. There were more paintings hidden somewhere on the yacht, and these people clearly believed they had a claim to them. He thought about Uncle Ezra's death, supposedly from a heart attack while alone on his boat in some remote anchorage. Now he wondered if it had really been natural causes. A creak from the companionway behind him made Marcus spin around. A man was climbing up from the lower cabin, tall, athletic, wearing expensive casual clothes that couldn't quite hide the bulge of a shoulder holster. He'd been outflanked. "Found him, Elena," the man called out in accented English. His smile was cold and professional. "Mr. Chen, please come topside. Elena doesn't like to be kept waiting, and trust me, you want Elena to remain in a good mood." Marcus had no choice but to comply. He climbed toward the deck, the document case clutched against his chest, the crowbar useless now. Whatever his uncle had been involved in, he was now part of it whether he wanted to be or not. The question was whether he'd live long enough to find a way out. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marina as Marcus returned to the serendipity, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a bag of basic tools in the other. Sleep had been impossible after yesterday's discovery. Every creak of his apartment building, every car door slamming in the street below, had sent his heart racing. The painting, if it was real, represented more money than he'd ever dreamed of touching. But something about finding it felt wrong, like stumbling into someone else's nightmare. The yacht looked even more decrepit in daylight. Paint peeled from her hull in long, cancerous strips, and rust had eaten through several of the deck railings. Marcus climbed aboard, noting how the boat shifted under his weight with an unsettling groan. Uncle Victor had let this beauty rot for years before his death. Why? Marcus made his way to the hidden compartment, his pulse quickening with each step. In the harsh morning light, the painting looked even more magnificent and more dangerous. The brushwork was exquisite, the colors still vibrant despite what must have been decades of storage. He photographed it with his phone from multiple angles, then carefully rewrapped it. But the painting wasn't his only concern. If Victor had hidden one valuable item, there might be others. Marcus began a systematic search of the yacht, checking every panel, every cabinet, every surface that might conceal another secret. In the galley, behind a loose board near the ancient refrigerator, his fingers found the edge of something papery. He pried the board away and discovered a manila envelope, thick with documents. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Black and white images of paintings, sculptures, ornate jewelry. Each photo had notations in Victor's spidery handwriting, dates, locations, and what appeared to be code names. Marcus recognized some of the artwork from documentaries about World War II art theft. His stomach dropped. There was more. Shipping manifests, correspondence in multiple languages, and a leather journal filled with Victor's notes. As Marcus flipped through the pages, a chilling picture emerged. His uncle hadn't just been a smuggler, he'd been part of an international network dealing in stolen art, much of it looted during the war and never returned to its rightful owners. The journal's final entries, dated just weeks before Victor's death, told a different story. The handwriting grew erratic, desperate. Victor wrote about cleaning the slate and making things right. He'd apparently tried to leave the network, but they wouldn't let him walk away. The last entry was a single line: "They know about the boat. Moving the collection tonight." Marcus's blood went cold. Victor had died in a car accident. At least, that's what the police report had said. But now Marcus wondered if his uncle's death had been as accidental as it appeared. A shadow passed across the porthole, and Marcus froze. Footsteps on the dock, coming closer. He quickly stuffed the documents back into the envelope and shoved it into his jacket. Moving as quietly as possible, he peered through the grimy window. Two men in dark suits were walking along the pier, checking boat names as they went. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning each vessel methodically. The larger man had a pronounced scar running from his left ear to his jaw. His companion was younger, lean, with the predatory grace of someone accustomed to violence. Marcus's mouth went dry. They were looking for something, or someone, and they were 3 boats away from the serendipity. He had minutes, maybe less. Marcus grabbed the painting and the envelope, his mind racing through options. The water was too cold for swimming, and there was nowhere to hide on the open deck. The men would board and search the yacht thoroughly. If they found him here, he had no doubt about what would happen next. The yacht's old engine bay offered his only chance. Marcus squeezed through the narrow hatch, clutching the painting to his chest. The space was cramped and reeked of diesel fuel and decay, but it was hidden from casual view. He pulled the hatch closed just as he heard voices on deck. "This is it," said a voice with a slight accent. Russian, Marcus thought. "The old man's boat." "Piece of junk," replied the second man. "You sure he hid anything valuable here?" Victor was clever. He made people underestimate him. "Search everything." Marcus pressed himself against the cold metal of the engine block, barely breathing. Above him, he could hear the men moving through the yacht, opening cabinets, pulling up floorboards. They knew exactly what they were looking for, and they had no intention of leaving empty-handed. The search continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Marcus's leg began to cramp in the confined space, and the diesel fumes were making him dizzy. Through the thin bulkhead, he could hear the men growing frustrated. "Nothing," said the scarred man finally. "Either someone got here first, or the old bastard moved everything before he died. The boss won't be happy. The boss is never happy. Come on, let's check the Marina office. Maybe someone saw something." The storm hit without warning, turning the harbor into a churning cauldron of foam and fury. Marcus pressed himself against the yacht's cabin wall, rain lashing his face as he struggled to secure the loose tarp he'd been using to cover his work. The ancient vessel groaned and pitched violently against its moorings, metal cables singing in the wind like tortured souls. He'd been living aboard the Serendipity for 3 days now, unable to shake the feeling that his cramped apartment was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards above, every shadow passing by his window had sent ice through his veins. The yacht, decrepit as it was, felt safer somehow. Isolated, defensible, and most importantly, it held the paintings. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the harbor in stark white relief. In that brief moment, Marcus caught sight of a figure standing on the dock, motionless despite the driving rain. The darkness swallowed the scene again, but the image burned in his retinas, a tall silhouette in a long coat watching. His blood turned to ice water. Marcus scrambled toward the cabin door, his wet hands slipping on the corroded handle. Another flash of lightning revealed the dock was empty. Either the figure had moved, or his paranoia was finally getting the better of him. Inside the cabin, he fumbled for the battery-powered lantern he'd brought from shore. The weak lead glow pushed back the darkness just enough to reveal the controlled chaos of his makeshift research station. Printouts from art databases covered every available surface alongside photographs he'd taken of the 3 paintings with his phone. The Monet water lily study dominated one wall of the hidden compartment, while the smaller works, a Picasso sketch and what appeared to be a Van Gogh preliminary study, rested carefully wrapped in the yacht's musty blankets. Marcus had spent the last 2 days confirming what he'd suspected from the moment he first laid eyes on them. These weren't replicas or study pieces. They were authentic works, stolen from private collections across Europe over the past decade. The most recent theft had occurred just 6 months ago, a brazen heist from a Swiss collector's private vault that had made international headlines. His uncle Victor had been involved in something far more dangerous than Marcus had ever imagined. The old man he remembered from childhood, gruff, solitary, smelling of cigarettes and engine oil, had apparently run in circles where million-dollar artwork changed hands like playing cards. The yacht lurched hard to starboard, throwing Marcus against the navigation console. Something metallic clattered across the floor, and he heard what sounded like footsteps on the deck above. His heart hammered against his ribs as he killed the lantern, plunging the cabin into complete darkness. The footsteps moved with purpose, too steady and deliberate to be explained by the storm's violence. Someone was aboard the Serendipity. Marcus felt his way toward the hidden compartment, his fingers finding the concealed latch by memory. The narrow space barely accommodated his frame, but it would have to do. He squeezed inside, pulling the panel closed just as the cabin door burst open. Through the thin wall he heard voices, two men speaking in what sounded like Russian. Their words were muffled by the storm, but their tone carried clearly enough. They were searching for something, methodically working through the cabin's contents. Drawers slammed open, papers rustled, and furniture scraped across the deck. Marcus pressed his back against the Monet, acutely aware that millions of dollars in stolen art surrounded him in this coffin-sized space. His phone was back in the main cabin, along with any chance of calling for help. Not that the police would be much use. He was harboring stolen goods, which made him complicit in whatever web of crime his uncle had woven. One of the voices grew closer, practically on the other side of the hidden panel. Marcus held his breath, fighting the claustrophobic panic that threatened to overwhelm him. A harsh beam of light swept across the cabin, visible through the hairline cracks around the compartment's edges. Then the light stopped moving. Marcus heard the man say something sharp in Russian, followed by a response from his companion. Heavy footsteps approached, and Marcus felt vibrations through the wall as someone began examining the area around the hidden panel. His uncle had been careful with the concealment. The seams were nearly invisible, disguised by years of grime and careful craftsmanship. But these men weren't casual intruders. They knew what they were looking for, and they had the patience to find it. The yacht pitched again, accompanied by a sound that made Marcus's stomach drop, the groan of metal under stress. One of the mooring cables had snapped, leaving the Serendipity secured by only two remaining lines. In seas this rough, it wouldn't be long before the others failed. The beam of light moved away from the hidden panel, and Marcus heard the men moving toward the stern. They were checking every compartment, every possible hiding place. It was only a matter of time before they discovered the secret that had already cost at least one person their life. As if summoned by his darkest thoughts, the second mooring cable gave way with a metallic scream that cut through the storm's roar. The marina's security office smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across Detective Sarah Chen's weathered face. Marcus sat across from her, his hands still trembling slightly as he recounted finding Uncle Dimitri's body. He'd called the police immediately after discovering the corpse, knowing that any delay would only make him look more suspicious. "So you hadn't seen your uncle in 15 years, Chen said, her pen scratching across a yellow notepad. "But he left you everything in his will." "That's right." Marcus kept his voice steady, fighting the urge to glance toward the yacht, where millions in stolen artwork remained hidden behind a false panel. "We had a falling out when I was a kid. I was surprised to inherit anything, honestly." Chen's dark eyes studied him with the intensity of someone who'd heard countless lies. "The medical examiner's preliminary assessment suggests your uncle died of natural causes. Heart attack, most likely, but given his associations, we have to be thorough." Associations? Dmitry Volkov wasn't exactly a model citizen, Mr. Hayes. He had connections to some unsavory people, import-export businesses that didn't always stick to legitimate cargo. She leaned back in her chair, which creaked under the movement. "You sure he never mentioned any business dealings to you?" Marcus shook his head, grateful he didn't have to lie about that part. "Like I said, we barely spoke. I knew he traveled a lot, but I figured he was just some eccentric old sailor." A knock on the door interrupted them. A young officer poked his head in, holding a manila folder. "Detective, the harbor master's records you requested." Chen took the folder and flipped through its contents. "Interesting. Your uncle's yacht returned to port 3 days ago after being out for 2 weeks. Customs shows he filed the proper paperwork for a fishing expedition, but..." She pulled out a photograph. This was taken by harbor security when he docked. The image showed Uncle Dmitri stumbling down the yacht's gangplank, clearly intoxicated or ill, but what caught Marcus's attention was the figure in the background, a tall man in an expensive suit watching from the pier. Even in the grainy photo, there was something predatory about his posture. "Any idea who that might be?" Chen asked. Marcus studied the photo, his blood running cold as he noticed the man's distinctive silver hair and angular features. He'd seen that face before in news articles about high-end art galleries and exclusive auction houses. Vladimir Kozlov, one of the most powerful art dealers in the city, and according to whispered rumors, a man with ties to the Russian mob. Never seen him before, Marcus lied, knowing that admitting recognition would only invite more questions he couldn't answer. Chen nodded but didn't look entirely convinced. We'll be keeping the yacht sealed as a crime scene for another day or two while we complete our investigation. After that, it's all yours. She handed him a business card. Call me if you remember anything else about your uncle's activities. Marcus left the security office with his heart pounding. The presence of Vladimir Kozlov in that photo changed everything. If Uncle Dmitri had been dealing with someone that dangerous, it meant the artwork hidden on the yacht wasn't just stolen. It was stolen from people who wouldn't hesitate to kill to get it back. He walked toward the parking garage, his mind racing through possibilities. Maybe he should just walk away, let the police discover the hidden compartment during their search. But Chen had said they were treating it as a natural death, which meant their investigation would be perfunctory at best. They might never find the artwork, leaving him free to claim it. The sound of footsteps behind him made Marcus quicken his pace. The garage was poorly lit, filled with shadows between the concrete pillars. He told himself he was being paranoid, but the footsteps seemed to match his rhythm exactly. He reached his car and fumbled with the keys, hands shaking as he tried to unlock the door. The footsteps stopped somewhere behind him, but he could feel eyes watching him in the darkness. The key finally slid home, and he yanked the door open, diving inside and immediately hitting the locks. As he started the engine, his headlights swept across the garage, illuminating a figure standing beside a black sedan. The man was too far away to make out clearly, but Marcus caught a glimpse of silver hair before the figure melted back into the shadows. He drove home through empty streets, checking his rear-view mirror every few seconds. The same black sedan seemed to appear and disappear behind him, always staying just far enough back to maintain plausible deniability. By the time he reached his apartment building, Marcus was convinced he was being followed. As he climbed the stairs to his unit, one thought echoed in his mind. Uncle Dmitri's death might not have been as natural as it appeared. And if Vladimir Kozlov knew about the artwork, then Marcus had just inherited far more than a rotting yacht. He'd inherited a death sentence. The marina's security office reeked of stale coffee and cigarettes. Marcus sat rigid in a plastic chair while Detective Sarah Chen flipped through pages of his uncle's file, her dark eyes scanning each document with methodical precision. Through the grimy window, he could see the serendipity bobbing innocently at her slip, hiding secrets that could destroy him. "Your Uncle Dmitri was quite the character," Chen said without looking up. 3 arrests for smuggling, 2 for art forgery, 1 for assault. Never convicted on anything serious, though, slippery as an eel. Marcus's throat felt dry. "I barely knew him. Family drama, you know how it is." "Mm-hmm." She finally raised her eyes. "Funny thing about family drama, it has a way of following bloodlines. You sure you don't know why someone would torch his boat?" The lie came easier this time. Maybe insurance fraud. The yacht wasn't exactly seaworthy. Chen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, then stood abruptly. "Don't leave town, Mr. Reeves. We'll have more questions." As soon as she disappeared through the door, Marcus bolted. His hands shook as he fumbled with the yacht's lock, desperate to get below deck before anyone else showed up asking uncomfortable questions. The hidden compartment seemed to mock him as he stared at the paintings. The weeping woman gazed back with knowing eyes, as if she understood the trap he'd stumbled into. He needed help, but who could he trust? The police were clearly investigating Dmitri's connections. His ex-wife would laugh at him. His few friends would run screaming from anything involving stolen art worth millions. That left exactly one option, and Marcus hated himself for even considering it. 20 minutes later, he stood outside a cramped antique shop in the city's arts district. The faded sign read, "Kowalski Acquisitions" in peeling gold letters. Through dusty windows, he could see Victor Kowalski hunched over a magnifying glass, examining what looked like a medieval manuscript. The bell above the door wheezed as Marcus entered. Victor looked up, a thin man in his 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the pale complexion of someone who spent too much time indoors with old things. "Marcus Reeves," Victor said, setting down his magnifying glass. "I wondered when you'd show up. Heard about poor Dimitri. You knew my uncle?" Victor's smile was cryptic. In this business, everyone knows everyone, especially when someone has Dimitri's eclectic taste in acquisitions. "Coffee?" Marcus shook his head. "I need to ask you something hypothetically." "Ah, hypothetical questions. My favorite kind." Victor poured himself tea from a samovar that looked genuinely antique. "Hypothetically speaking, of course. If someone inherited items of questionable provenance, what would their options be?" "Hypothetically. Depends on how questionable. Are we talking about Great-Aunt Millie's china that might have walked away from an estate sale or something more significant?" Marcus hesitated. Significant. Victor's demeanor shifted subtly, like a predator catching a scent. Hypothetically, someone in that position would have three choices. 1. Turn everything over to authorities and hope for leniency. 2. Try to return items quietly to their rightful owners. 3. Find a discreet buyer who doesn't ask uncomfortable questions. What would you recommend? That would depend entirely on what we're discussing hypothetically. Victor moved closer, his voice dropping. Perhaps a private viewing would help me provide better theoretical advice? Every instinct screamed at Marcus to walk away, but desperation overruled caution. "Tonight, after 10. Slip 47 at Bayshore Marina." Victor nodded slowly. "Hypothetically, I'll be there." The afternoon crawled by in a haze of paranoia. Marcus found himself jumping at every sound, studying every face in the marina for signs of surveillance. He grabbed lunch at a waterfront diner, forcing himself to eat while his stomach churned with anxiety. The paintings seemed to have infected his thoughts. He kept seeing the weeping woman's sorrowful expression everywhere he looked. As evening approached, he returned to the yacht and tried to prepare for Victor's visit. What exactly did one do when showing stolen masterpieces to a fence, offer wine and cheese? The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if people weren't already dying for these paintings. At 9:47 p.m., footsteps echoed on the dock. Marcus peered through the porthole and saw Victor approaching, carrying what looked like a doctor's bag. The old man glanced around nervously before stepping aboard. "Show me," Victor whispered once they were below deck. Marcus opened the compartment with trembling fingers. Victor's sharp intake of breath told him everything he needed to know. "Mein Gott," Victor breathed, pulling out a jeweler's loupe. "Do you have any idea what you've stumbled into? Enlighten me." Victor carefully lifted the weeping woman, examining the brushwork under a small flashlight. "These aren't just stolen, Marcus. These are from the Kronos collection. People have been looking for these pieces for decades. What's the Kronos collection?" Victor's face had gone pale. Art stolen by Nazis during World War II. Art that very dangerous people consider their rightful inheritance. The marina's security office smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across Detective Sarah Chen's weathered face. Marcus sat rigidly in the plastic chair, acutely aware that every word could either save him or damn him completely. "Let's start from the beginning," Chen said, clicking her pen. "When exactly did you discover the artwork?" Marcus had rehearsed this moment during the sleepless hours since finding Uncle Dimitri's body. Truth mixed with careful omissions. 3 days ago. "I was checking the yacht's structural integrity when I found a hidden panel. The paintings were wrapped in waterproof materials. And you didn't think to contact authorities immediately?" "I wasn't sure what I'd found. Some of the signatures looked legitimate, but I'm not an art expert. I was planning to have them authenticated before..." "Before what? Selling them?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Marcus met her gaze steadily before determining if they were stolen. I may be many things, detective, but I'm not a criminal. Chen made a note, her expression unreadable. Through the office's grimy window, Marcus could see the yacht rocking gently in its slip-yellow crime scene tape fluttering in the morning breeze. Dimitri's body had been removed hours ago, but the memory of his uncle's terrified final moments remained burned into Marcus's mind. Tell me about your relationship with Dmitri Volkov. There wasn't one. My father cut ties with him decades ago. I barely knew the man existed until his lawyer called about the inheritance. Yet he left you a yacht worth considerable money. Marcus almost laughed. Have you seen that rust bucket? I assumed he was sticking me with his debts. Chen leaned back, studying him. Mr. Torres, we've run preliminary checks on the artwork. 3 of the pieces match descriptions from a 1987 museum theft in Prague. The case was never solved, but Interpol estimated the collection's worth at over $50 million. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. 50 million. No wonder Victor and his associates were willing to kill for it. I had no idea, he said, which was partially true. He'd suspected the artwork was valuable and stolen, but $50 million elevated this from a serious crime to something that could topple governments. Your uncle never mentioned his business activities? Detective, until 4 days ago, I thought my uncle sold insurance. My family doesn't exactly hold regular reunions. Chen's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, frowned, then excused herself. Through the thin walls, Marcus could hear her muffled conversation, picking up fragments: federal jurisdiction, task force, keep him here. His blood chilled. Federal involvement meant this was bigger than local art theft, much bigger. When Chen returned, her demeanor had shifted subtly, more formal, more careful. Mr. Torres, I need to ask where you were last night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. The question he'd been dreading. At home. Alone. Can anyone verify that? No. He paused, weighing his options. Detective, am I a suspect in my uncle's murder? We're exploring all possibilities. Your uncle was tortured before he died. Someone wanted information from him badly enough to... She stopped herself. Let's just say it wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Marcus's mind raced. If they believed he'd killed Dmitri for information about the artwork, he was finished. But the alternative, explaining about Victor, the chase, witnessing his uncle's murder, would only make him look more guilty. I want to help find whoever did this, he said carefully. But I'm starting to feel like I need a lawyer. Chen closed her notebook. That's your right, of course. But Mr. Torres, if you're holding back information that could help us catch your uncle's killer... She didn't need to finish the threat. A knock interrupted them. A tall man in an expensive suit entered without waiting for permission. FBI, Marcus guessed from his bearing, and the way Chen immediately deferred to him. Mr. Torres? Agent David Walsh, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to discuss your uncle's associates. Marcus's mouth went dry. I already told Detective Chen. What you told local police and what you'll tell federal investigators are 2 different conversations, Walsh interrupted, settling into the chair beside Chen. Your uncle wasn't just an art thief, Mr. Torres. He was a key player in an international smuggling network that we've been tracking for 5 years. The room seemed to shrink around Marcus. International smuggling networks, federal task forces, 50 million in stolen art. He'd inherited more than a yacht. He'd inherited a war. Now, Walsh continued, opening a thick file, let's talk about what you really found on that boat. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the harbor, and Marcus realized his Uncle S. secrets were about to drag him into depths from which he might never surface. Marcus gripped the rail as another wave crashed over the bow, salt spray stinging his eyes. The yacht groaned beneath his feet, her aging hull protesting against the choppy waters off the coast. 3 days had passed since the warehouse confrontation, and every shadow on the horizon made his heart race. "We can't keep running forever," Sarah called out from the helm, her voice barely audible over the wind. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her usually pristine appearance had given way to wrinkled clothes and tangled hair. Marcus nodded grimly, studying the GPS display. They'd been zigzagging between small coastal towns, never staying in one marina longer than a few hours. The stolen artwork remained hidden in Uncle Theodore's secret compartment, but its presence felt like a ticking bomb in the yacht's belly. His phone buzzed with another unknown number. He'd stopped answering after the seventh threatening call that morning. The voice was always different, but the message remained the same: return what didn't belong to him or face consequences that would make the warehouse seem like a friendly warning. Sarah's tone had shifted to urgent concern. She pointed toward the stern, where a sleek speedboat had appeared on the horizon, its bow cutting through the waves with predatory precision. "We've got company." The speedboat was gaining fast, too fast for the old yacht to outrun. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized the distinctive black hull, the same type of vessel that had been circling the marina 2 nights ago when they'd made their hasty escape. "How did they find us?" Sarah demanded, pushing the throttle forward, despite knowing it was futile. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. GPS tracking on the yacht? His phone? Or maybe they'd simply been monitoring every marina along the coast, waiting for the distinctive silhouette of Theodore's vessel to appear. There, he pointed toward a narrow inlet between 2 rocky outcroppings. "Can you get us in there?" Sarah squinted at the treacherous passage. "It's shallow. If we run aground, better than whatever they have planned for us." She spun the wheel hard to port, the yacht responding sluggishly to her commands. Behind them, the speedboat had closed to within 200 yards, and Marcus could see figures moving on its deck. The glint of metal suggested they weren't carrying fishing equipment. The yacht's depth sounder began beeping frantically as they approached the inlet. Sarah killed the engine, letting momentum carry them forward through the narrow channel. Rocks scraped along the starboard side with a sound like fingernails on metal, but the hull held. "They're not following," Sarah observed, watching as the speedboat maintained position outside the inlet. "They know something we don't." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean spray. He grabbed the binoculars and focused on the shoreline ahead. What he saw made his blood freeze. Another black speedboat, this one waiting in the protected waters of the inlet like a spider in its web. "It's a trap," he breathed. Sarah's face went pale as she spotted the second vessel. They were caught between predator and prey, with nowhere to run. The yacht's engine wouldn't restart quickly enough to escape, and the rocky shores offered no refuge. "The artwork," Sarah said suddenly. "Maybe we can trade it for our lives." "You think they'll honor that deal?" Marcus shook his head. "We've seen too much. We know their faces, their operation. We're loose ends now." A voice boomed across the water from a megaphone. "Cut your engine and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with force." Marcus's eyes fell on the yacht's control panel, where Theodore's handwritten notes were still taped beside the instruments. One notation caught his attention, a cryptic reference to emergency protocols with coordinates that seemed to match their current location. "Sarah, look at this." He pointed to the coordinates. Uncle Theodore marked this spot specifically. She studied the numbers, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding. "Those aren't navigation coordinates. They're depth charges." The pieces clicked together in Marcus's mind. Theodore hadn't just been a collector of stolen art. He'd been paranoid enough to prepare escape routes and contingencies. The old man had rigged certain locations with underwater charges, designed to create distractions or eliminate evidence if necessary. "Can you trigger them remotely?" Marcus asked, examining the yacht's modified electronics. "If your uncle's modifications are still functional." Sarah's fingers flew over the control panel, searching for the activation sequence. "But Marcus, this could bring down half the inlet wall. We might not survive it either." The speedboats were closing in from both sides now, their engines growing louder. Marcus could see armed figures preparing to board, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't common criminals. They were military or ex-military, which meant his uncle had been involved, with people far more dangerous than art thieves. "Do it," Marcus said quietly. "Whatever Uncle Theodore was hiding, it's worth killing for. That makes it worth dying for, too." Sarah's hand hovered over the activation switch as the first speedboat drew alongside, its crew preparing to leap aboard. The warehouse smelled like rust and broken dreams. Marcus pressed himself against a corrugated metal wall, listening to footsteps echo through the cavernous space. 3 sets, maybe 4. They'd found him faster than he'd expected. "He's got to be in here somewhere," a gravelly voice called out. Torrino saw him go in. Marcus clutched the leather portfolio tighter against his chest. Inside were photographs of every piece in Uncle Ray's hidden collection, along with documentation that proved their authenticity. It was his insurance policy, and apparently his death warrant. The footsteps split up, spreading through the maze of abandoned machinery and shipping containers. Marcus had chosen this place because he knew it well. He'd spent summers here as a kid when it was still a functioning boatyard. Now it served as his potential tomb. He crept between 2 rusted hull sections, their skeletal frames casting twisted shadows in the dim light filtering through broken windows. The yacht was hidden 3 miles away in a different marina, but these men weren't interested in the boat anymore. They wanted what he'd taken from it. A metallic clang echoed from his left. Someone had knocked over a paint can. Marcus used the noise to mask his movement, slipping deeper into the warehouse's bowels. He needed to reach the back exit, but that meant crossing 40 feet of open space. "Marcus Chen," the voice made him freeze. It was cultured, accented, definitely not one of the thugs. "I know you can hear me. My name is Dmitry Volkov. Perhaps you've heard of me." Marcus had. Elena had mentioned Volkov during their brief phone conversation before the line went dead. "A collector," she'd said, "but the kind who collected things that weren't for sale, the kind who made them available through other means." "Your uncle was a reasonable man," Volkov continued, his voice carrying easily through the space. "We had an understanding. I'm hoping you might be equally reasonable." Marcus almost laughed. Uncle Ray reasonable? The man who'd faked his own death to escape whatever mess he'd created? But he kept quiet, working his way toward what he hoped was still an exit. The items in question belonged to several parties who are eager for their return. Some were taken from private collections, others from museums. All are quite valuable, and all carry significant emotional weight for their rightful owners. Stolen, in other words. Marcus had suspected as much when he'd researched the pieces online. Too many matched descriptions from unsolved heists across 3 continents. Uncle Ray hadn't just been a black market dealer, he'd been a fence for some of the world's most notorious art thieves. A beam of light swept past Marcus's hiding spot. Flashlights. They were being systematic now, checking every corner. He counted at least 5 beams, which meant more men than he'd initially thought. "I'm prepared to offer compensation," Volkov called out. "Enough to set you up quite comfortably. All I need is the location of the remaining pieces and any documentation your uncle may have left behind." The remaining pieces. That confirmed Marcus's growing suspicion that what he'd found wasn't everything. The hidden compartment had been large, but some of the documentation referenced items he hadn't seen. Uncle Ray had been smart enough not to keep all his eggs in one basket. Marcus reached the warehouse's rear section, where old office spaces had been carved out of the main floor. Most of the interior walls had been stripped away, leaving a maze of support beams and electrical conduits. He knew there was a service door somewhere back here, but in the dark, everything looked different. A footstep crunched behind him. Too close. "Hey! I think I see—" Marcus moved without thinking, swinging the portfolio like a club. It connected with something solid, and a man grunted in pain. Marcus didn't wait to see the damage, just ran toward where he hoped the exit would be. Shouts erupted behind him. Footsteps pounded on concrete. A flashlight beam found him, and suddenly the warehouse was full of running figures converging on his position. He spotted the door, a rectangle of lesser darkness against the black wall. 20 feet, 15. A hand grabbed at his jacket, but the old leather tore and he pulled free. 10 feet, 5. The door was chained shut. Marcus spun around, his back against the metal surface. 5 men formed a semicircle in front of him, flashlights creating a harsh spotlight. Behind them, Dmitry Volkov stepped into view, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive coat that looked out of place in the industrial setting. "That was unnecessary," Volkov said, looking at the man Marcus had hit. Blood trickled from the thug's nose. "But I admire your spirit. Your uncle had the same determination." Marcus pressed harder against the door, feeling the chain's cold links against his spine. "What happened to him? Really?" Volkov smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Raymond decided to retire without properly transferring his assets. "We're simply here to complete the transaction he left unfinished." The portfolio felt impossibly heavy in Marcus's hands. Inside it was everything these men wanted, and possibly the only thing keeping him alive. The Mediterranean sun cast long shadows across the deck as Marcus worked frantically to secure the artwork in waterproof containers. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cool sea breeze, but from the weight of what Elena had just revealed. His uncle hadn't just been a smuggler, he'd been running from the same people who were now hunting Marcus. "How much time do we have?" he asked, carefully wrapping a small Picasso sketch in protective plastic. Elena checked her encrypted phone, her face grim. "Kozlov's yacht left Monaco 3 hours ago. At their speed, maybe 6 hours before they reach us." Marcus's mind raced. 6 hours to either run or make a stand. The Serendipity could barely manage 8 knots on a good day, and they were still anchored near the coordinates his uncle had marked. Even if they started now, Kozlov would catch them in open water. "There's something else," Elena said quietly. "Your uncle didn't just steal these pieces. He was working with Interpol." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He straightened up, nearly dropping the painting in his hands. "What are you talking about?" Vincent Chen was an undercover operative. He'd been tracking stolen artwork for years, building cases against collectors like Kozlov. The pieces on this yacht, their evidence. Marcus stared at her, pieces of a puzzle suddenly rearranging themselves in his mind. His uncle's mysterious wealth, the careful modifications to the yacht, the hidden compartment's sophisticated design. It hadn't been greed driving Vincent Chen, it had been justice. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Marcus demanded. "Because I wasn't sure you could handle it, and because—" Elena hesitated, then pulled out her phone, showing him an official-looking identification. "Because I'm Interpol too. Vincent was my partner." The phone slipped from Marcus's fingers, clattering onto the deck. Everything he thought he knew shifted again. Elena wasn't just some mysterious woman who'd appeared in his life. She was a federal agent who'd been using him to recover stolen artwork. "You've been lying to me from the beginning," he said, his voice barely controlled. "Not lying. Protecting the mission. And protecting you." Elena stepped closer, but Marcus backed away. "Vincent was killed because someone inside Interpol leaked information about the operation. I couldn't trust anyone, including you, until I was certain." "Certain of what?" "That you weren't working with them. That you really were just an unlucky nephew who inherited the wrong yacht." Marcus felt a bitter laugh escape his throat. "Lucky me!" Before Elena could respond, the yacht's radio crackled to life. A smooth, accented voice filled the air, Russian, speaking English with cold precision. "Serendipity, this is Dmitry Kozlov. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Marcus and Elena exchanged glances. She grabbed the radio microphone. "This is Serendipity. You're on international waters. State your business." Kozlov's laugh was like ice. "My business is quite simple. Your late friend Vincent Chen took certain items from my collection. I want them returned." "We don't know what you're talking about," Elena replied. "Please, Agent Torres, we both know that's not true. I'm prepared to make this simple. Surrender the artwork, and you live. Make this difficult, and you join Vincent at the bottom of the sea." Marcus grabbed the microphone from Elena. "How do we know you won't kill us anyway?" "Ah, the nephew speaks. Marcus Chen, isn't it? Vincent spoke of you before he died. Said you were nothing like him, weak, unambitious. Perhaps he was wrong." The words stung, but Marcus pushed past the pain. "What's your offer?" "Simple. I'm tracking your position now. You have 1 hour to prepare the artwork for transfer. My men will collect it, and you'll never see me again." The radio went dead. Elena was already moving, pulling equipment from hidden storage compartments Marcus hadn't even known existed. "We're not giving him anything," she said firmly. "Those pieces are evidence in dozens of cases. Art theft, money laundering, connections to terrorist financing. Kozlov's operation is massive. So what's the plan? Fight off a yacht full of armed criminals with what? Harsh language?" Elena smiled grimly and opened a case Marcus definitely hadn't seen before. Inside were weapons, pistols, ammunition, and something that looked suspiciously like explosives. Vincent prepared for this possibility. "This yacht has more surprises than you know." She handed him a pistol. "Can you shoot?" Marcus took the weapon, surprised by its weight. "I've been to firing ranges." "Good enough." Elena began checking her own weapon with practiced efficiency. "We're going to use the yacht's hidden capabilities to our advantage." Vincent installed more than just secret compartments. As if on cue, the radio crackled again. Not Kozlov this time, but another voice, speaking in rapid Italian. Elena's face paled as she listened. "What is it?" Marcus asked. That wasn't Kozlov's yacht on the radio. It was someone else entirely. Elena looked out at the horizon, where a distant speck was growing larger. "We're not dealing with one enemy anymore. We're caught in the middle of a war." The abandoned warehouse squatted like a concrete tumor against the industrial skyline, its broken windows staring blindly at the murky harbor beyond. Marcus pulled his rental car between two rusted shipping containers, killing the engine as his hands trembled on the steering wheel. The silence that followed felt thick with menace. Elena emerged from the passenger seat, her movements fluid, despite the tension radiating from her shoulders. "This is insane," she whispered, scanning the desolate surroundings. "We should have gone to the police." "With what evidence? A dead body that's probably fish food by now." Marcus checked his phone for the third time. "No signal. Of course. Besides, you said it yourself, we don't know how deep this corruption runs." The text message had arrived 2 hours ago, unsigned but unmistakably threatening, Pier 47 warehouse. "Bring the money. Come alone or the girl pays." A grainy photo of Elena entering her apartment had accompanied the message, taken just that morning. They'd spent precious minutes arguing before Marcus convinced her to hide in the car's trunk while he entered alone. She'd emerged 6 blocks away, furious but alive. Now, staring at the warehouse, he wondered if his plan would get them both killed. "Stay behind me," he murmured, pulling the wrapped painting from the back seat. The Monet felt impossibly light for something worth millions, its canvas edges soft with age beneath the protective cloth. The warehouse's main door hung open like a gaping mouth. Marcus stepped inside, Elena close behind despite his protests. Pale light filtered through the broken ceiling, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts in the stagnant air. "Mr. Chen," the voice echoed from the warehouse's depths, cultured and cold. "I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." A figure emerged from behind a stack of mouldering crates. Marcus recognized him immediately from the yacht club photographs in Uncle Theodore's study. Richard Blackwood, silver-haired and immaculate even in this decrepit setting. His expensive suit looked absurdly out of place among the industrial decay. "I brought what you wanted," Marcus called out, raising the wrapped painting. "Now explain what the hell this is about." Blackwood's smile held no warmth. "Your uncle was a gifted forger, Mr. Chen, talented enough to fool some very important people for a very long time." He gestured to the painting. "That particular piece was commissioned by certain individuals who prefer their art acquisitions to remain off the books." "Stolen artwork," Elena said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Such a crude word. "I prefer liberated treasures. Your uncle provided authentication services for our organization. When he developed a conscience in his final months, it became problematic." Marcus felt ice crystallize in his veins. "You killed him." Theodore's death was regrettable but necessary. He'd begun making copies of our transactions, threatening to expose operations spanning 3 decades. Blackwood's eyes glittered in the dim light. "We couldn't allow that, so you made it look like an accident." Heart failure is surprisingly easy to induce in a man of his age and habits. Blackwood stepped closer, his footsteps echoing hollowly. What we didn't anticipate was his sentimental streak, hiding evidence aboard that floating relic of his. Elena shifted beside Marcus, her hand brushing against his arm. He felt her press something small and hard into his palm, her phone recording. "Smart girl. The painting, Mr. Chen. Place it on the ground and step back." Marcus hesitated, mind racing. Once Blackwood had what he wanted, there'd be no reason to keep them alive. The warehouse's isolation suddenly felt suffocating. "I don't think so," he said, backing toward a stack of shipping pallets. "Not until you guarantee our safety." Blackwood's laugh was like breaking glass. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate." He raised his hand, and 2 men emerged from the shadows flanking the warehouse's rear exit. Both carried guns with practiced ease. "The painting, or Miss Rodriguez dies first." Elena's intake of breath was sharp, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she moved to Marcus's left, creating distance between them, making herself a harder target. "Wait," Marcus said, unwrapping the top corner of the canvas. "Look at it first. Make sure it's what you want." Blackwood's eyes locked onto the exposed fragment of painted water lilies. The moment stretched taut as wire. Marcus let the cloth fall completely, revealing the canvas beneath. But instead of Monet's masterwork, crude black letters spelled out a single word across the painting's surface: evidence. Blackwood's composure cracked. "What is this?" "Insurance," Marcus said, adrenaline flooding his system. "The real painting is somewhere safe, along with copies of every document my uncle hid on that yacht. Transaction records, authentication certificates, client lists, everything." "You're bluffing." Marcus met his stare. "Try me." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of harbor waves lapping against concrete. Somewhere in the building's depths, metal creaked ominously. Blackwood's smile returned, colder than before. "No, Mr. Chen, I think you're about to learn the price of overplaying your hand." He nodded to his men. The abandoned cannery reeked of rust and rotting fish, its broken windows staring out at the harbor like dead eyes. Marcus crouched behind a stack of corroded machinery, watching Elena position herself near the loading dock entrance. The Monet reproduction lay between them in a waterproof case, bait for the trap they'd carefully constructed. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Sarah Chen, Coast Guard, standing by. 2 minutes out. The plan was simple. Let Kozlov's men take the painting, follow them back to their base, and catch the entire operation red-handed. What could go wrong? Marcus tried to ignore the voice in his head listing about 50 possibilities. A black SUV pulled up to the cannery's main entrance. 3 men emerged, moving with military precision. Marcus recognized the leader immediately. Victor, the man who'd turned his uncle's yacht into splinters. The scar running down his left cheek caught the dim harbor light as he surveyed the building. "I don't like this." Elena's voice crackled through his earpiece. Too quiet. She was right. Where Marcus expected to see backup vehicles or additional surveillance, there was only emptiness. Either Kozlov's operation was smaller than anticipated, or they were walking into something far worse than a simple exchange. Victor's team entered the cannery through the front, while Marcus circled around back. The building groaned under his footsteps as he climbed rusted stairs to an observation deck overlooking the main floor. Below, Elena emerged from the shadows, carrying the case. "You have something that belongs to my employer," Victor called out, his accent thick but his English precise. "I have something your employer stole," Elena replied, setting the case down but keeping one hand on the handle. "The question is whether you're here to make a deal or start a war." Victor smiled, a cold expression that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Kozlov doesn't make deals with thieves. Then we have a problem." The sound of additional vehicles arriving outside made Marcus's blood freeze. Through the broken windows, he counted at least 6 more men taking positions around the building. This wasn't an exchange, it was an execution. He keyed his mic. "Elena, get out, now." Too late. Victor raised his hand, and his men moved with practiced efficiency. Elena dove behind a concrete pillar as automatic weapon fire erupted across the cannery floor. The case skittered across the concrete, forgotten in the chaos. Marcus drew his uncle's old service pistol, a relic he'd found hidden in the yacht's cabin. 6 shots against an army. He needed to even the odds. The building's electrical system had been condemned for years, but power still flowed to the massive overhead crane that had once moved shipping containers. Marcus sprinted along the catwalk, bullets sparking off metal beams around him. One tore through his jacket sleeve, close enough that he felt its heat. Elena was pinned down, returning fire with her backup weapon. She was skilled but outnumbered 5 to 1. Marcus reached the crane's control booth and smashed the protective glass with his gun butt. The ancient machinery groaned to life, hydraulics screaming in protest. Marcus swung the massive hook in a wide arc across the main floor, forcing Victor's team to scatter. One man wasn't fast enough. The hook caught him in the chest and sent him flying into a support column with a sickening crunch. "The painting!" Elena shouted over the mechanical noise. The case had split open, revealing the Monet reproduction, but as Marcus looked closer, his heart sank. The canvas was wrong, too bright, too perfect. This wasn't even their reproduction. Victor seemed to realize the same thing. His face darkened as he picked up the painting, examining it in the dim light. "Where is the real artwork?" "Safe," Elena called out, reloading behind her pillar. "Did you really think we'd bring the actual pieces to a meeting with murderers?" The distant sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. Coast Guard, finally. But Victor wasn't retreating. Instead, he pulled out a detonator, its red light blinking ominously. If we can't have the art, no one can have anything. Marcus understood too late. They'd planted explosives throughout the building. This wasn't just about recovering stolen artwork. It was about eliminating witnesses and sending a message. Kozlov was cleaning house. "Elena, move!" Marcus abandoned the crane controls and sprinted back along the catwalk as the first charges detonated below. The building shuddered, support beams twisting like pretzels. He reached the emergency ladder as the floor began collapsing beneath Victor's team. Elena appeared at the base of the ladder, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. "The boats," she gasped. "Marina." They both understood. This had been a diversion. While Kozlov's men kept them busy at the cannery, the real operation was hitting the marina where the inheritance and the actual stolen artwork waited under Coast Guard protection. The building collapsed behind them as they ran toward the harbor, Victor's screams lost in the thunder of falling concrete and twisted metal. The storm hit harder than the weather reports had predicted. Marcus gripped the yacht's wheel as another wave crashed over the bow, sending spray across the windshield of the pilot house. The wipers struggled against the deluge, creating brief moments of clarity before the next wall of water obscured his vision. "How much further?" Elena shouted over the howling wind, her knuckles white as she braced herself against the navigation console. Marcus squinted at the GPS display, its green glow wavering as the boat pitched violently. "Maybe 20 minutes if we can maintain this heading." The engines strained against the mounting seas, and he could feel the old yacht protesting with every wave. Behind them, barely visible through the storm's fury, the lights of Kozlov's pursuit boat flickered like angry stars. The Russian had found them faster than expected, his resources apparently extending to real-time maritime tracking. Marcus had hoped the storm would provide cover, but it seemed to be hampering both vessels equally. A particularly massive wave lifted the yacht's stern, and Marcus felt the propeller cavitate as it briefly broke the surface. The engine screamed, then caught again as they plunged into the trough. In the cargo hold below, he could hear objects shifting despite the securing he'd done earlier. The stolen paintings were wrapped in waterproof tarpaulins and strapped down, but he wondered if they'd survive this beating any better than he would. Elena's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, her face pale in the instrument lights. Detective Morrison says the FBI task force is moving on Kozlov's mainland operations, but they can't reach us out here. We're on our own until we make port. Another crash of water over the bow, this one so heavy it momentarily pushed the yacht sideways. Marcus corrected hard to starboard, feeling the hull shudder under the stress. He'd learned to handle the boat over the past few weeks, but this was beyond anything he'd experienced. The yacht was old, and he could sense its limitations with every groan of the frame. "There's something else," Elena continued, studying her phone. Morrison traced the painting's provenance. They weren't just stolen from the museum. They were originally looted by the Nazis during World War II. The families who lost them have been searching for decades. Marcus absorbed this information while fighting to keep them on course. It explained why Kozlov was so desperate to recover them, and why the stakes felt higher than simple theft. These weren't just valuable artworks, they were pieces of history, symbols of loss and survival that carried weight beyond their monetary value. A searchlight suddenly pierced the storm behind them, sweeping back and forth across the churning water. Kozlov's boat was gaining ground, its more powerful engines and professional crew giving it an advantage in these conditions. The beam found them, locked on, and held steady despite the violent motion of both vessels. "He's closing the gap," Elena observed, her voice tight with concern. Marcus pushed the throttles forward, coaxing every bit of power from the yacht's aging engines. The tachometer needles climbed into the red zone, and he could smell hot oil mixing with the salt spray. He was asking too much of machinery that had already been pushed beyond reasonable limits. The radio crackled to life, Kozlov's accented voice cutting through the static. "Mr. Chen, you are making this unnecessarily difficult. The storm will do my work for me if you continue on this course. Your vessel is not equipped for these conditions." Marcus grabbed the microphone. "Then back off and let us reach port. We can discuss this on dry land." A harsh laugh came through the speaker. "I think not. You have something that belongs to me, and I intend to collect it tonight." Elena was studying the chart, tracing routes with her finger. "There's a small harbor about 15 miles northeast. It's barely marked, but it might be deep enough for us if we can make the entrance." Marcus looked where she pointed. The harbor was protected by a narrow inlet between rocky headlands, dangerous to navigate in calm weather, potentially suicidal in a storm. But staying on their current course meant facing Kozlov in open water, where his superior firepower would decide the outcome. "It's risky," he said, already beginning the course change. "Everything's risky now," Elena replied. As they turned toward the harbor, Marcus felt the yacht respond differently to the waves, taking them on the quarter instead of head-on. The motion became more violent, but somehow more manageable. Behind them, Kozlov's searchlight swept frantically before finding them again on their new heading. The pursuing vessel began its own turn, but Marcus had gained precious distance during the maneuver. The old yacht might not be fast, but it was nimble when pushed to its limits. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the massive waves surrounding them in stark, terrifying detail. In that brief moment of visibility, Marcus saw the rocky coastline ahead, jagged and unforgiving. They were committed now to threading the needle between destruction by nature and destruction by human greed. The harbor entrance lay somewhere in that wall of stone and spray, hidden in the storm's fury. The sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the dawn air sent Marcus scrambling for cover behind a rusted shipping container. The industrial dock stretched endlessly in both directions, a maze of cranes and cargo that offered both sanctuary and danger. Elena crouched beside him, her breath visible in the cold morning mist. "They found us faster than I expected," she whispered, checking the magazine of her pistol. Marcus clutched the waterproof case, containing 3 of the smaller paintings, their insurance policy and their death warrant rolled into one. The rest of the collection remained hidden aboard the yacht, which was currently moored 12 miles offshore under Victor's watchful eye. "Maybe we should have stayed with the boat," Marcus said, watching as the helicopter circled overhead like a mechanical vulture. Victor was right. We need allies on land, not just escape routes on water. Elena peered around the container's edge. The warehouse should be 2 blocks north. If Dmitri kept his word, we'll have backup waiting. The helicopter's searchlight swept across the dock, its beam cutting through the morning gloom. Marcus had never imagined that inheriting his uncle's yacht would lead to this. Crouched in a shipping yard, hunted by people who treated murder like a business expense. The paintings that had seemed like a miraculous windfall now felt like radioactive cargo. They moved in short bursts between containers, using the industrial maze to mask their approach. The helicopter circled wider, its crew apparently unable to pinpoint their exact location among the sprawling dockyard. But Marcus knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. There, Elena pointed to a weathered building ahead, its windows dark but its loading dock accessible. Dmitri said to look for the blue door. As they approached the warehouse, Marcus noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel and oil stains that suggested recent vehicle activity. Either Dmitri had prepared as promised, or they were walking into another trap. Given the week he'd had, Marcus wasn't optimistic about their chances. Elena reached the blue door first and knocked in a specific pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. The door opened immediately, revealing a thin man with silver hair and nervous eyes. "You're late," Dmitri said in accented English, ushering them inside. "Kozlov's people have been tightening the net all morning." The warehouse interior was dimly lit, but showed signs of hasty preparation. Several black SUVs were parked inside, their engines warm. Armed men in tactical gear nodded acknowledgement as Elena entered, their deference suggesting she commanded more respect in this shadow world than Marcus had realized. "What's the situation?" Elena asked. "All business despite having run through hostile territory for the past hour." Dmitri spread a tablet across a nearby crate, displaying a map of the city marked with red and green dots. "Kozlov has checkpoints here, here, and here," he pointed to the red markers. "But we have safe routes marked in green. The question is your destination." Marcus set the case down carefully, his arms aching from carrying it. "We need to get back to the boat. Victor has the rest of the collection." "Impossible." Dmitri shook his head. "Coast Guard is cooperating with Kozlov's search. Every vessel within 20 miles is being boarded." Elena studied the map, her expression grim. "Then we bring the boat to shore, somewhere Kozlov won't expect." "The old Smuggler's Cove," Dmitri suggested, pointing to an unmarked inlet south of the city. "Abandoned since the 80s, but deep enough for a yacht. Your captain would need precise coordinates." Marcus pulled out the satellite phone Victor had given him. "He'll need more than coordinates. Kozlov's people aren't going to just let us sail away." "Leave that to us," Elena said, accepting a tactical vest from one of Dmitri's men. "We create enough chaos in the city to draw their attention while Victor brings the yacht to the rendezvous." The plan was desperate, risky, and probably suicidal. But as the helicopter's rotors grew louder overhead, Marcus realized they were past the point of safe choices. His uncle had left him more than a yacht and some stolen paintings. He'd inherited a war. "How long to reach the cove?" Marcus asked, strapping on body armor that felt absurdly heavy. 2 hours by road if we're not intercepted," Dmitri replied. "Your boat captain will need 3 hours minimum to navigate safely to the inlet." Elena was already coordinating with her team, speaking rapid Russian into a radio. Marcus caught enough words to understand they were planning multiple diversions across the city, false leads and genuine threats designed to fracture Kozlov's resources. "Once we're all at the cove, then what?" Marcus asked. "Even if we escape with the paintings, Kozlov won't stop hunting us." Elena's smile was cold and predatory. "Who said anything about escaping? It's time to stop running and start fighting back." The warehouse erupted into activity as teams prepared to deploy across the city. Marcus gripped the case tighter, realizing that his uncle's final gift wasn't just artwork or money. It was the chance to discover what he was truly capable of when survival demanded everything. The warehouse smelled of rust and decades-old motor oil, its cavernous interior broken only by shafts of amber light. filtering through grimy skylights. Marcus crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, his heart hammering against his ribs as footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. 3 sets moving, with military precision, toward the yacht's temporary berth. Elena pressed her back against the container beside him, her breathing shallow and controlled. In her hands, she clutched the leather portfolio containing photographs of every piece in Uncle Victor's collection, their only bargaining chip, now that Kozlov's men had tracked them here. "How did they find us so fast?" Marcus whispered. Elena's jaw tightened. "Kozlov has resources we underestimated. The harbor master, dock workers, half the port could be on his payroll." Through a gap between containers, Marcus watched 3 figures spread out around the yacht. Even in the dim light, he recognized Dmitri's massive frame and the woman who'd nearly killed them at the hotel. The third man was new, lean, predatory, moving like a dancer across the oil-stained floor. "The paintings are still aboard," Elena murmured. "If we can reach the yacht, it's a trap." Marcus grabbed her arm as she started to move. "They're not searching the boat. They're waiting for us." As if summoned by his words, Kozlov emerged from behind the yacht's stern, his silver hair catching the light. Even at this distance, Marcus could see the cold satisfaction on his face. The old man knew exactly where they were hiding. "Marcus Chen," Kozlov called out, his accented voice carrying easily across the warehouse. "You have something that belongs to me. I have something that belongs to you." 2 more figures stepped into view. Sarah, her hands zip-tied behind her back, and Detective Morrison, blood trickling from a cut above his left eye. Dmitri held a pistol to Sarah's temple while the lean man kept Morrison at gunpoint. Marcus felt his world tilt. Sarah's eyes found his across the warehouse, wide with terror but trying to project strength. Morrison looked grimmer, calculating angles and distances with a cop's tactical awareness. 30 seconds, Kozlov continued. "Then I start removing fingers. Your choice who's go first." Elena's hand found Marcus's shoulder. "We have to give him what he wants. The moment we show ourselves, we're dead. The moment we don't, they are." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. Uncle Victor's legacy had become a curse that touched everyone around him. But Sarah didn't deserve to pay for his family's sins. He stood up slowly, hands visible and empty. "Smart boy." Kozlov smiled. "Now come down here. Bring the portfolio." Marcus stepped out from behind the containers, Elena reluctantly following. Each step felt like walking toward his own execution, but Sarah's life hung in the balance. The warehouse seemed to stretch endlessly before them, their footsteps echoing like gunshots. When they reached the open space around the yacht, Kozlov gestured for them to stop 20 feet away. "The photographs, please." Elena held up the portfolio. "First, let them go." Kozlov chuckled. "You are hardly in a position to negotiate, but I am feeling generous." He nodded to Dmitri, who shoved Sarah forward. She stumbled but kept her feet, zip ties still binding her wrists. "The portfolio," Kozlov repeated. Elena tossed it across the gap. The lean man caught it smoothly and handed it to his boss. Kozlov opened it, his eyes scanning the photographs with the hunger of a collector who'd waited decades to reclaim his prize. "Magnificent," he breathed. Victor always had exquisite taste. Pity he lacked loyalty to match. "Now, Morrison," Marcus demanded. "I think not." Kozlov closed the portfolio. "Detective Morrison has become rather inconvenient, as have you all." The warehouse erupted in chaos. Morrison, hands apparently not as securely bound as they'd appeared, drove his elbow into his captor's solar plexus and dove for cover behind a fuel drum. The lean man's pistol barked, sparks flying from concrete where Morrison had been a heartbeat before. Elena tackled Marcus sideways as Dmitri's gun swung toward them. They hit the ground hard, rolling behind the yacht's hull as bullets chewed chunks from the fiberglass above their heads. Sarah scrambled for cover, her bound hands making every movement awkward and desperate. "The hatch," Elena gasped, pointing to the yacht's stern. "We can reach the paintings, maybe find another way out." But Marcus was watching Morrison, who'd produced a backup weapon from an ankle holster and was laying down, covering fire. The detective caught his eye and mouthed the single word, "Run." Instead, Marcus broke cover, sprinting not toward the yacht, but toward the warehouse's electrical panel mounted on the far wall. If they were going to die here, he'd make sure Kozlov didn't walk away with Uncle Victor's stolen legacy intact. His fingers found the main breaker just as muzzle flashes lit up the darkness behind him. The warehouse stood like a concrete tomb against the storm-bruised sky, its corrugated walls weeping rust stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Marcus crouched behind a shipping container, rain hammering his shoulders as he studied the building through binoculars. 3 guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements synchronized with military precision. "There," Sarah whispered, pointing to a service entrance on the eastern wall. Motion sensors been spray-painted black. Someone disabled it recently. Marcus lowered the binoculars. The paintings were inside. He could feel it in his bones. After 3 days of following breadcrumbs through shell companies and forged shipping manifests, they'd traced Volkov's operation to this abandoned facility in the industrial district, the same district where his Uncle Charlie had worked 40 years ago, before everything went wrong. "We should wait for backup," Detective Morrison said, water streaming from his jacket hood. His face looked haggard, older somehow, as if the weight of corruption within his own department had physically aged him overnight. "There is no backup," Marcus replied grimly. "Half the cops in this city are on Volkov's payroll, and the other half won't believe our story until it's too late." A black sedan pulled into the warehouse lot, its headlights cutting through the downpour. Marcus recognized the driver immediately. Victor, Volkov's enforcer, the man who'd turned Charlie's yacht into a floating morgue. The passenger door opened, and Volkov himself emerged, his expensive coat pristine despite the weather. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "They're moving the collection tonight. This is our only chance." Marcus nodded, his mind racing through the plan they'd hastily constructed. "Get inside, document the stolen artwork, and transmit the evidence to every news outlet and federal agency simultaneously. Simple in theory, potentially fatal in practice." They waited until Volkov disappeared inside, then moved like shadows across the lot. The disabled motion sensor proved Sarah right. The service door was unlocked, probably used by whoever had been preparing the shipment. Marcus eased it open, wincing at the slight squeal of hinges. The warehouse interior stretched before them like an aircraft hangar, filled with wooden crates and industrial shelving. Harsh fluorescent lights illuminated the far end, where men in coveralls were carefully loading paintings into climate-controlled shipping containers. Marcus counted at least a dozen masterpieces, their combined value approaching 9 figures. "Jesus," Morrison breathed. "That's the Monet that went missing from the Gardner Museum. And the Van Gogh from the Vienna heist," Sarah added, her camera already documenting everything through its telephoto lens. Marcus spotted Uncle Charlie's final secret, a painting he recognized from art history textbooks, one that had vanished from a Berlin museum during World War II. His uncle hadn't just stumbled onto a theft ring, he'd uncovered a network spanning decades, possibly generations. Volkov's voice echoed across the warehouse, sharp with irritation. "The ship leaves at midnight. I want everything loaded and secured within the hour." Marcus motioned for the others to retreat, but Sarah shook her head, still filming. The warehouse floor groaned above them. Someone was moving across the mezzanine level. Marcus looked up and saw a security camera swiveling in their direction. "Run," he whispered. The explosion of movement shattered the warehouse's tense quiet. Shouts erupted from the far end as workers scrambled for weapons. Morrison drew his service pistol, providing cover as they sprinted toward the exit. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets sparking off concrete and steel. They burst through the service door into the storm. Marcus's car waited 50 yards away, but Victor's men were already flanking them, muzzle flashes illuminating their faces in the darkness. Sarah stumbled, her camera equipment weighing her down. Marcus grabbed her hand. "Leave it!" "The evidence already uploaded to the cloud," she gasped, dropping the bag. They reached the car as bullets shattered the rear window. Marcus gunned the engine, tires screaming against wet asphalt as they careened into the street. In the rearview mirror, he saw Volkov standing in the warehouse doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. Morrison was already on his radio, calling for federal backup at the docks. "They'll try to load everything onto a cargo ship," he said. "International waters means no jurisdiction." Sarah's phone buzzed with confirmation messages. The photos and video files were spreading across the internet, news outlets already picking up the story. There was no containing it now. But Volkov wouldn't surrender quietly. Marcus had inherited more than Uncle Charlie's yacht. He'd inherited a war that had been brewing for decades. The old man's conscience had finally caught up with him, and now Marcus was carrying that burden forward. The radio crackled with reports of federal agents surrounding the warehouse, but Marcus knew they'd find nothing but empty crates. Volkov was too experienced, too connected to be caught that easily. The real confrontation was still coming, and it would be on Volkov's terms. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, rain lashing the windshield as they raced through the night toward an uncertain dawn. The warehouse smelled of rust and decades of maritime decay. Marcus pressed his back against a shipping container, listening to the footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. 3 sets, maybe 4. Hartwell's men had found them faster than expected. "Stay close," he whispered to Elena, who clutched the waterproof case containing the Monet. The other paintings were already in Detective Rivera's hands, if she'd made it to the FBI field office alive. That was a big if, considering how deep Hartwell's influence ran. A metallic clang resonated from somewhere to their left. Marcus tensed, remembering his uncle's final message hidden in the yacht's logbook. The Meridian collection was never about money. It was insurance against men who think themselves untouchable. Now Marcus understood. Uncle Theodore hadn't stolen the artwork for profit. He'd taken it to expose a network of corruption that stretched from City Hall to federal agencies. Every painting was documented evidence of bribes, money laundering, and murder stretching back 15 years. "Movement Sector 7, a voice called out. "Too close." Marcus grabbed Elena's hand, and they crept between towering stacks of shipping containers. The warehouse was a maze, but Marcus had studied the layout during their reconnaissance yesterday. There was a service tunnel that connected to the old subway system, if they could reach it. "Why didn't your uncle just go to the police?" Elena breathed. "He tried," Marcus replied, thinking of the newspaper clippings they'd found. "Detective Morrison, the one investigating the original theft?" Uncle Theodore reached out to him. Morrison was found dead in the harbor 3 days later. A beam of light swept across the container above their heads. Marcus pulled Elena down as boots crunched past their hiding spot. His phone vibrated. A text from Rivera, FBI compromised. "Hartwell has inside info. Trust no one in federal building." Marcus's blood ran cold. If Rivera couldn't deliver the evidence safely, then the Monet in Elena's arms was the only proof left of Hartwell's crimes. The painting's provenance, documents, hidden in the frame, detailed payments to judges and prosecutors. Without it, Hartwell would disappear, and they'd end up like Uncle Theodore. There, Elena pointed to an access door marked with faded warnings, the service tunnel entrance. They made their move, sprinting across open ground. Behind them, shouts erupted. Marcus fumbled with the door's rusted handle as bullets sparked off metal nearby. The lock was corroded but gave way just as footsteps pounded toward them. They tumbled into darkness. The tunnel was narrower than expected, forcing them to crawl. Marcus's knees scraped against broken concrete as Elena pushed ahead with the case. The sound of their pursuers grew muffled but didn't disappear. "Marcus Chen." Hartwell's voice echoed through speakers mounted in the tunnel. Somehow he'd tapped into the warehouse's PA system. "You have something that belongs to me. Let's discuss this like civilized people." "Civilized people don't murder their business partners," Marcus called back, knowing Hartwell could probably hear him through hidden microphones. A laugh crackled through static. "Your uncle was naive. He thought exposing our arrangement would serve some greater good, but justice is a luxury for those who can afford it. I'm simply a businessman optimizing my investments. They reached a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Elena consulted her phone's compass app. Left leads to the subway platform. We can catch the red line. But as they turned left, Marcus heard something that made his stomach drop. Water. Not dripping, but rushing. The tunnel ahead was flooding. He's opened the emergency valves, Marcus realized. Hartwell wasn't just hunting them, he was trying to drown them like rats. The middle tunnel, Elena said urgently. It goes up towards street level. They reversed course as water began lapping at their ankles. The middle passage was even tighter, forcing them to squeeze through gaps where decades of settling had warped the walls. Marcus's jacket caught on a protruding pipe, and he had to twist free as the water level rose behind them. Light appeared ahead, not electric, but natural daylight filtering down through a storm grate. Marcus boosted Elena up first, then passed her the case. As she worked to lift the heavy grate, water rushed past Marcus's waist. "Got it!" The grate swung open, revealing a narrow alley between buildings. Marcus hauled himself up just as the tunnel filled completely. They emerged into afternoon sunlight, soaked and exhausted, but alive. Elena opened the case to check the painting. The waterproof seal had held. The Monet was undamaged. More importantly, the frame's hidden compartment still contained the documents that could bring down Hartwell's empire. "Now what?" Elena asked. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number from his uncle's contacts, an investigative journalist named Sarah Kim, who'd been trying to expose corruption in the city for years. "We go public," he said as the phone rang. Uncle Theodore was right about one thing. The truth is the only weapon we have left. But even as he spoke, Marcus spotted a black sedan pulling into the alley behind them. They weren't safe yet. The warehouse erupted in gunfire as Marcus dove behind a shipping container, his heart hammering against his ribs. Elena pressed against him, clutching the waterproof case containing the final piece of evidence that would expose the entire smuggling operation. Above them, bullets sparked off metal with violent precision. "How many?" Elena whispered, checking her weapon. Marcus peered around the corner. Dimitri's men had taken positions throughout the cavernous space, their muzzle flashes creating a deadly constellation in the darkness. Too many. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3 weeks ago, his biggest concern had been whether the coffee shop would stay afloat. Now he was trapped in a firefight over stolen masterpieces worth more than most countries' GDP. His uncle's rotting yacht had been the gateway to a world he never wanted to enter. "The exit's blocked," Elena said, studying the tactical situation with professional calm. "But there's a maintenance ladder to the roof access." More gunfire peppered their hiding spot. Marcus could hear Dimitri shouting orders in rapid-fire Russian, coordinating his men's advance. They were running out of time and options. Elena's phone buzzed. She answered it quickly. "Torres here." Her expression shifted. "How long?" A pause. "Copy that. What is it?" Marcus asked. "FBI tactical team is 3 minutes out. We just need to—" The shipping container beside them exploded in a shower of sparks as someone opened up with an automatic weapon. Marcus grabbed Elena's hand and they sprinted toward the maintenance area, staying low and using the maze of crates for cover. Behind them, Dimitri's voice cut through the chaos. "Bring me the case. Kill the woman if necessary, but I want Marcus alive." They reached the ladder as footsteps thundered across the warehouse floor. Elena went first, Marcus close behind. His shoulders still ached from their underwater escape from the yacht 2 days ago, but adrenaline pushed him upward. A gunshot rang out below. A bullet whined past Marcus's ear, embedding itself in the concrete wall. He climbed faster, his hands slipping on the rungs. They burst through the roof access into the cool night air. The harbor stretched out before them, dotted with lights from passing ships. In the distance, Marcus could see the blackened skeleton of his uncle's yacht, still smoldering from the fire they'd set to destroy Dimitri's remaining inventory. "This way," Elena said, leading him toward the edge of the building where a fire escape descended to an alley. The roof access door exploded open behind them. Dimitri emerged, flanked by 2 armed men. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit torn and dirty. The composed art dealer facade had cracked completely, revealing something savage underneath. "Enough running, Marcus," Dimitri called out. "You have something that belongs to me." "It never belonged to you," Marcus replied, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "None of it did." Dimitri laughed bitterly. "Your uncle thought the same thing, right up until the end." The admission hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You killed him." He was supposed to be a simple courier, but William developed a conscience at the worst possible moment, started asking questions, making demands. Dimitri raised his weapon. Family trait, apparently. Elena stepped forward, her gun trained on Dimitri. "It's over. The evidence is already in FBI hands. Your entire network is blown. Perhaps. But loose ends still need tying up." The sound of helicopters filled the air. Searchlights swept across the warehouse roof as federal agents rappelled from aircraft. Dimitri's men opened fire on the descending figures, but they were overwhelmed within seconds. Dimitri kept his weapon pointed at Marcus, even as red laser sights danced across his chest. "The case, Marcus. Last chance." Marcus looked at the waterproof container in his hands. Inside were documents proving that Dimitri's operation had been stealing and selling artifacts for decades, laundering money through legitimate galleries and private collectors. Museums worldwide had unknowingly purchased stolen treasures. Families had been robbed of their heritage. "No," Marcus said simply. Dimitri's finger tightened on the trigger. Elena fired first. The art dealer stumbled backward, his shot going wild. He tottered at the roof's edge for a moment, surprise replacing malice in his eyes. Then gravity claimed him. Federal agents swarmed the rooftop. Elena flashed her credentials and quickly briefed the team leader, while paramedics checked Marcus for injuries. He found himself staring out at the harbor, thinking about his uncle sailing these same waters, probably wrestling with the same moral dilemmas that had consumed the last 3 weeks of Marcus's life. Later, as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Marcus stood on the dock where it had all begun. The insurance money from the yacht would keep his coffee shop running. The reward for recovering the stolen artwork would set him up for life. But more importantly, the families whose treasures had been stolen would finally have them returned. Elena approached, looking exhausted but relieved. "How are you holding up?" Marcus watched the sunrise reflect off the water, thinking of his uncle's final sacrifice. "Better than expected. Ready to go home."